That scream echoed through the emergency room hallway like a gunshot. "Don't treat her, she's just a worn-out old woman." The words came out of my daughter-in-law Jennifer's mouth with a coldness that made even the nurse freeze in place. The silence that fell in that emergency room was deafening. I lay there, lying on that gurney, feeling my chest tighten, not just from the physical pain that had brought me to that hospital, but from the humiliation of hearing that in front of strangers. My son Michael was beside her, and he said absolutely nothing. He just looked away as if I weren't there, as if those words hadn't just shredded what was left of my dignity. The nurse, a woman in her 40s, with kind eyes, looked at me with a mixture of shock and compassion. She held my hand for a brief second, as if to reassure me that everything would be okay, but we both knew something had broken right there in that room. The doctor, a tall man with gray hair, looked at Jennifer with an expression I couldn't decipher. He didn't say anything at that moment, just jotted something down on his clipboard and continued examining me. But there was something in his eyes, an intensity that made me realize he understood exactly what was happening. When Jennifer and Michael left the room for a few minutes, the doctor approached me and discreetly placed a folded piece of paper in my hand. "Don't open it now," he whispered. "Read it when you're alone." That piece of paper held a truth I never imagined, a revelation that would not only save my life, but also restore everything I thought I'd lost forever. If you're listening to me now, you probably know that family relationships aren't always as they appear in soap operas, right? Here on this channel, you'll find a welcoming space where real stories like mine are shared without filters or judgment. These stories will make you reflect, feel emotional, and perhaps even recognize situations you've experienced or witnessed yourself. This is a safe place for those who understand that real life can be much more complex and surprising than any fiction. Subscribe to the channel and join this community where every story matters and where you'll never be alone. Together, we've learned that even in the most painful situations, there's the possibility of a new beginning and transformation. Now, let me tell you from the beginning how I ended up in that hospital and what that doctor's note revealed that changed absolutely everything in my life. My name is Margaret. I'm 68 years old, and for a long time, I believed that being a good mother-in-law meant accepting everything. Quietly, always available, always understanding, always willing to help without question. I met Jennifer 12 years ago when my son Michael brought her home for dinner for the first time. She was beautiful, well-dressed, and perfectly polite. I remember that night she complimented my cooking, helped with the dishes, and even gave me a tight hug goodbye. I thought I had gained not just a daughter-in-law, but a daughter I never had. How wrong I was. The first few years were peaceful. They got married. I helped with the party as best I could, contributing $5,000 from my savings. Jennifer seemed grateful, Michael was happy, and I felt fulfilled watching my son build his own family. When my first granddaughter, Emily, was born 3 years after the wedding, I was in the hospital waiting room, vibrating with joy. I remember holding that little baby for the first time and feeling my heart overflow with love. Jennifer asked me to help out for the first few months, saying she needed someone experienced around, and I obviously accepted right away. I started going to their house 3 times a week. I took care of Emily while Jennifer rested, cooked meals, cleaned the house, and did laundry. I loved every second of it. I felt useful, needed, and an important part of their lives. 2 years later, my grandson Noah arrived. Once again, Jennifer called me to help, and once again, I was there, ready for anything. This time, I went to their house every day. I woke up at 5 in the morning, took 2 buses to get there by 7, and stayed till 6 in the evening, helping with the children, the house, and the meals. Jennifer had gone back to work and said she couldn't afford a babysitter. I didn't care. My grandchildren needed me, and I was happy to be present in their lives. Michael worked hard, came home late, and when he did, he was always too tired to talk. But I understood he was building his career, providing for his family. During all those years, I never asked for anything in return. I never charged for my time, never complained about being tired, never questioned when Jennifer asked me to do extra things, like go to the grocery store for them or pick up dry cleaning. I just wanted to be the best grandmother and mother-in-law possible. I wanted them to know they could always count on me. Things began to change subtly about 3 years ago. Jennifer began making comments about my parenting. She said I let Emily watch too much TV, that I gave Noah too much candy, that my cooking was too heavy for the kids. At first, I accepted her criticism, quietly trying to adapt to her rules. After all, she was the children's mother. She had the right to decide how she wanted them to be raised. But the comments became increasingly frequent and more vitriolic. One day in front of me, while I was folding the children's clothes, she said that I was old-fashioned and that my grandmotherly methods no longer worked in the modern world. It hurt, but I swallowed it and continued folding in silence. I began to notice that Jennifer avoided letting me be alone with the children. She always found an excuse to be there, always supervised me, always corrected me. When I tried to talk to Michael about it, he said I was being overly sensitive, that Jennifer only wanted the best for the children, that I needed to understand that times had changed. I kept quiet and continued trying to do the best I could. 2 years ago, my husband passed away. Richard was my partner for 43 years, and losing him was like losing a part of myself. I was left alone in that large house we bought together, surrounded by memories and a silence too heavy to bear. Michael came to the funeral, stayed for half an hour, and left saying he had to take care of the children. Jennifer didn't even show up, texting that she had a virus. In the months following Richard's death, loneliness consumed me. I called Michael almost every day, sometimes just to hear his voice, to have some human contact. He always answered in a hurry, always had to hang up quickly, always promised to call me back, but rarely did. I started going to their house more often, seeking some comfort in the presence of my grandchildren. But Jennifer began making it clear that I was no longer welcome as often. She said I showed up unannounced, that I interrupted the children's routine, that I needed to respect their family's space. Each visit became a painful experience where I felt like an intruder in my own son's life. It was around this time that I started having health problems. Chest pains that came and went, shortness of breath, extreme fatigue. I went to the doctor a few times, but they always told me it was anxiety, grief, or just getting older. They prescribed me tranquilizers and sent me home. I took the medication, but the pain persisted. I tried to talk to Michael about it, but he always downplayed it, saying I was becoming a hypochondriac, that I needed to get out more, make friends, find hobbies. As if it were that simple. As if I wasn't genuinely feeling something wrong with my body. Jennifer was even worse. One day when I mentioned my pain while at their house, she rolled her eyes and said every woman my age has pain. That it was part of the aging process that I needed to stop making a fuss and accept that I was getting older. It hurt deeply, but as always, I swallowed it and pretended not to care. Emily's birthday was about a year and a half ago. She was turning 7 and had asked for a big party with all her school friends. I was excited. I'd bought her a special gift, a set of books from a series she loved, which cost me $200. It was a lot of money for me, considering I was living solely on Richard's pension, but I wanted to see my granddaughter's smile when she opened the gift. I arrived at the party half an hour early, wanting to help with the preparations. Jennifer opened the door with an expression I couldn't read. She let me in, but didn't say anything about my early arrival. The house was beautiful, decorated with pink and gold balloons, a huge table laden with sweets and savory treats. I was impressed by how meticulously everything was done. I started to help arrange the chairs when Jennifer came up to me and said in a cold voice, "Margaret, you don't have to stay." I paused, confused. "What do you mean, I didn't have to stay? It was my granddaughter's birthday." She continued, "It would be best if you left before the guests arrived. Emily requested a party with just her little friends, and having grandparents around will make the other kids uncomfortable." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. I tried to argue, trying to say I'd arrived early precisely to help that. I wouldn't disrupt the party, that I'd stay in a discreet corner. But Jennifer was adamant. She practically pushed me out of the house, took the gift from my hands, and closed the door. I stood on the sidewalk stunned, watching through the window as people began to arrive, listening to the laughter and music. I rode the bus home with my eyes burning with tears I refused to let fall. I tried to talk to Michael about what had happened at the party. I called him the next day and told him everything, hoping he would understand how humiliating and painful it had been. He sighed on the other end of the line and said Jennifer had told a different story. According to her, I had arrived at the party drunk, was making a scene, and she had to ask me to leave, so as not to embarrass Emily in front of her friends. I was speechless. Drunk, I barely drank a glass of wine at most on Christmas. Scandal, I had simply arrived early to help. I tried to defend myself, but Michael said he trusted his wife's word that I probably didn't remember correctly because of the drinking, and that it would be best for me to seek help for my alcohol problem. I hung up the phone in shock. My own son was believing lies about me. I spent weeks without proper sleep rehashing that conversation, wondering how things had gotten that way. The following months were silent torture. I tried to stay in touch with Michael, but he rarely answered my calls. When he did, it was always brief, always cold, always in a hurry to hang up. I stopped going to their house because it became clear I wasn't welcome. That Christmas, I wasn't invited to dinner. I spent the night alone at home eating reheated soup, staring at the family photos that decorated my living room, silently mourning the family I'd lost even though they were all still alive. I tried texting Emily and Noah to wish them a Merry Christmas, but no one responded. On New Year's Eve, I tried calling Michael at midnight, but he didn't answer. I left a voicemail wishing them a healthy and happy New Year, trying to keep my voice steady despite the lump in my throat. He never returned my call. It was in March of this year that everything reached its breaking point. I was at home. It was a normal Tuesday when I felt a chest pain unlike any other I'd ever felt. It was a sharp pain radiating down my left arm, leaving me breathless. I tried to wait it out as usual, took my tranquilizers, lay on the couch. But this time the pain only worsened. After 2 hours of trying to cope, I realized I needed help. I grabbed my phone with shaking hands and called Michael. He answered after several rings, clearly irritated. "What now, Mom?" he said without even greeting me. I tried to explain that I was feeling sick, that I thought I needed to go to the hospital, that I couldn't drive alone. He sighed loudly, that sigh filled with impatience I had learned to fear. "Mom, you're always sick. Every week is a new pain. You need to stop this paranoia and accept that nothing serious is wrong with you." I tried to insist, saying that this time it was different, that the pain was unbearable. He was silent for a moment, then said, "Okay, I'll come get you, but only because Jennifer insists." I wondered why Jennifer insisted, since she was always the first to downplay my health problems, but I didn't have time to think about it much. The pain was getting worse by the minute. It took Michael an hour to get to my house. An hour where every minute felt like an eternity, where the pain in my chest intensified and fear gripped me. When I finally heard the doorbell, I dragged myself to the door and opened it. Michael was there with Jennifer by my side. This surprised me because I hadn't expected her to come along. "Let's go," he said, without even asking how I was. They got into their car, me in the back seat, feeling like an inconvenient burden. During the drive to the hospital, I heard Jennifer whisper to Michael, "Something about me overreacting again? About how this was messing up their plans for that night?" He nodded with a grunt. I tried to focus on my breathing, tried to ignore their words, just tried to survive the pain that felt like it wanted to rip me apart. We arrived at the emergency room, and Michael helped me out of the car, pushing me more than actually helping. At the reception desk, he gave me my information mechanically, without emotion, as if he were filling out some form for work. "I can't stay here long," he told the receptionist. "I have important appointments today." So that cut me like a knife. I was there, possibly having a heart attack, and my son was worried about his commitments. I was taken to the emergency room and placed on a stretcher. A nurse came in to perform the first tests, taking my blood pressure, asking questions about my symptoms. Michael and Jennifer stood in the corner of the room, talking quietly to each other, visibly impatient. The doctor came in, Dr. Harrison, a man who must have been in his 60s, with a serious demeanor but kind eyes. He began examining me, pressing different points on my chest, listening to my heartbeat, asking more questions. I tried to answer as best I could despite the pain and nervousness. It was when he asked the nurse to prepare an EKG that Jennifer exploded. She got up from the chair she was sitting in and walked over to the gurney where I was lying. "Doctor," she said in that sweet, deceptive voice I'd come to recognize, "is it really necessary to do all these tests? She always comes to the hospital with these same complaints. And it's never anything serious. She has a history of hypochondria and alcoholism. We're worried she's wasting your precious time with patients who truly need urgent care." I felt my face burn with humiliation. Hypochondria, alcoholism, what lies were those? Dr. Harrison looked at Jennifer with a neutral expression and said he needed to do the tests anyway, that chest pain should always be taken. Seriously. Jennifer rolled her eyes and returned to her place beside Michael. The nurse began placing the electrodes on my chest for the EKG. I was shaking not just from physical pain, but from humiliation and sadness. How had I gotten to this point? How could my daughter-in-law say those things about me in front of strangers? Dr. Harrison reviewed the EKG results with a frown. He asked the nurse to prepare some more tests, blood tests, to check cardiac markers. Jennifer let out a loud, dramatic sigh. "How long will this take?" she asked irritably. "Because we really do have other commitments today." The doctor didn't answer, just continued his work. Michael and Jennifer were asked to leave the room while they drew my blood and performed other procedures. I was left alone with the nurse and the doctor, and for the first time since I'd arrived, I felt I could breathe a little easier even with all the physical pain. The nurse, whose name tag said her name was Susan, held my hand as she drew the blood. "You're being very brave," she said softly. That almost made me collapse. It was the first kind word anyone had spoken to me in months. After about 40 minutes, the test results began to arrive. Dr. Harrison reviewed them silently, his expression growing more serious. He called another doctor in for a consultation. He spoke quietly, looking over the papers and occasionally casting worried glances in my direction. My heart raced, not just because of my physical condition, but also because of the fear of what those looks meant. Finally, Dr. Harrison approached my gurney. "Ms. Margaret," he said gravely, "your tests show that you're having an acute myocardial infarction. We need to act quickly. We'll admit you immediately and prepare you for possible surgery." I felt my world spin around me. Heart attack surgery. So it wasn't hypochondria, as Jennifer claimed. It wasn't paranoia, as Michael insisted. Was there really something seriously wrong with me? Dr. Harrison left to talk to Michael and Jennifer about my condition. I could hear the conversation through the half-open door. "Your mother is having a serious heart attack," he explained. "If they hadn't brought her when they did, she probably wouldn't have survived until tomorrow. We'll need to admit her to the cardiac ICU and prepare her for emergency angioplasty." There was a moment of silence, and then I heard Jennifer's voice, cold as ice. "Doctor, with all due respect, but she's 68 years old. How is it worth investing all this money and resources in someone who's already at the end of her life? She's already lived a long time." The silence that followed was heavy. "I can't believe I'm hearing this," Dr. Harrison said, his voice controlled but clearly indignant. "We're talking about saving a life. We're talking about your husband's mother." Jennifer wasn't intimidated. "It's precisely because she's his mother that I'm thinking rationally about this. Her health insurance won't cover everything, and guess who'll have to pay the difference? Us. And honestly, we're not willing to spend our money on expensive treatments for someone who will probably die in a few years anyway. If she's going to go, let her go in peace without costing a fortune." It was at that moment that the scene that opened this story unfolded. Dr. Harrison had called Nurse Susan to begin the preparations for my admission to the ICU. Jennifer burst into the room like a hurricane, went straight to the nurse adjusting my IV, and screamed those words that echoed throughout the ER. "Don't treat her. She's just a worn-out old woman. She's not worth the investment. Let nature take its course." Nurse Susan froze in place, the 4 needles still in her hand. Other nurses passing by in the hallway stopped to see what was happening. A hospital security guard began to approach. Michael stood behind Jennifer, not saying a word, not defending me, not even looking in my direction. I felt something die inside me at that moment. It wasn't just my physical heart that was failing, it was also my emotional heart, my will to fight, my hope that there was still love in this family. Dr. Harrison, who had maintained a professional demeanor until then, completely lost his temper. He turned to Jennifer, his eyes blazing with anger. "Ma'am," he said in a firm voice that echoed throughout the room, "I don't know what kind of person you are, but here in this hospital, every life is valuable. I will treat Miss Margaret to the best of our ability, and you have absolutely no authority to stop me. Furthermore, I will ask you to leave this area immediately. You are disrupting the medical environment and interfering with the treatment of a patient. Security, please escort these people out of the emergency room." Jennifer turned red with rage. "You can't throw me out of here," she began to scream. "I'm her family. I have a right to be here." Dr. Harrison didn't hesitate. "You lost that right the moment you put financial interests above the life of a human being. And for your information, I will document everything said here today in the patient's medical record." Michael finally spoke. "This is absurd," he said without conviction. "My wife is only concerned about the family finances." The doctor cut him off. "Your mother is literally dying, sir, and you're worried about money. Leave now before I call the police for disturbing you and possible attempted willful medical neglect." Michael and Jennifer were escorted out of the emergency room by security. Before leaving, Jennifer gave me a look of pure hatred, as if I were to blame for everything, as if my heart attack were an inconvenience I'd purposefully created to ruin their plans. Michael didn't even look at me. He simply turned and left. I lay there on that gurney with Nurse Susan holding my hand, tears finally streaming down my face. They weren't just tears of physical pain, they were tears of emotional pain accumulated over years of swallowed humiliations, of unrequited love, of a son I'd lost even though he was still alive. Dr. Harrison approached me again this time, with a soft, compassionate expression. "Ms. Margaret," he said gently, "we're going to take very good care of you. You're going to get through this surgery and you're going to be fine. Don't worry about anything right now. Just focus on recovering." He paused, then continued. "There are some things I need to tell you, but they'll have to wait until after the surgery. For now, I just want you to know that you're not alone." He gave my shoulder a gentle squeeze and then began instructing the team on the preparations for the emergency angioplasty. That's when he discreetly placed that folded piece of paper in my hand. That piece of paper that held a secret that would change everything. They took me to the operating room about an hour later. The entire staff was extremely kind and attentive, explaining every step of the procedure and assuring me that I would be fine. The anesthesia began to take effect, and the last thing I remember before I blacked out was Nurse Susan's gentle voice telling me she would be there when I woke up. The surgery, I was later told, lasted for hours. They had to place 3 stents in my severely blocked coronary arteries. Dr. Harrison later explained that if I had waited a few more hours to seek help, probably wouldn't have survived. The pain I'd been experiencing for months, which everyone dismissed as hypochondria or anxiety, it's actually a sign that my heart was progressively failing. If they had taken me seriously earlier, if someone had truly listened to me, I might not have reached that critical point. I woke up in the cardiac ICU about 2 hours after the surgery. Everything was hazy with tubes and machines all around me, bright lights on the ceiling. Nurse Susan was there as promised. "Welcome back, Mrs. Margaret," she said with a warm smile. "The surgery was a success. Dr. Harrison should be with you soon." I tried to speak, but my throat was dry and sore from the breathing tube that had been used during the surgery. Susan gave me some ice chips to suck on and explained that would have to stay in the ICU for at least 3 days for monitoring before being transferred to a regular room. I asked, my voice weak and hoarse, if Michael had called or shown up. Susan hesitated before answering. "No, honey," she said softly. "No one from your family has contacted us. But don't worry about that now. You have a whole team here taking care of you." I spent the entire night awake, even with the sedatives they'd given me. My mind kept replaying the horrific scene in the emergency room. Jennifer's words echoed in my head. We're now, old woman? Not worth the investment. Let nature take its course." And Michael's silence, his refusal to defend me. His choice to stay by her side as she tried to convince the doctors to let me die. How could a son I'd carried for 9 months, whom I'd breastfed, whom I'd raised with so much love and sacrifice, turn into this? Where had I gone wrong? What had I done so wrong to deserve to be treated this way? Tears streamed silently down my face as the machines around me beeped steadily, reminding me that I was still alive, even if part of me wished I wasn't. Was the next morning when Dr. Harrison came to make his rounds that he finally handed me the paper he'd placed in my hand before surgery. "Remember this paper I gave you yesterday?" he asked. "It's time for you to read it." With trembling hands, I unfolded the paper. The handwriting was clear and firm, and the message contained within left me completely speechless. "Margaret," the paper read, "there are things about your daughter-in-law and your son that you need to know. I can't speak openly for ethical reasons, but I can direct you to where to find the answers. Jennifer works in financial administration at the hospital where I'm undergoing private treatment for a serious health problem. During an appointment 2 months ago, I overheard her talking to a colleague about a scheme she and her son have concocted. They're waiting for you to die to collect the life insurance your late husband left in your name. Apparently, you're the beneficiary of a $500,000 policy they recently discovered." Jennifer mentioned that she was speeding up the process by creating emotional stress and isolation, waiting for your health to deteriorate naturally. She literally said that the faster you died, the faster they would have access to the money. When she saw you having a heart attack today, it wasn't genuine concern that brought her here. It was reassurance that the plan was working. Her behavior in the emergency room was an attempt to let you die without appearing directly responsible. Get a lawyer as soon as you leave here. I have today's hospital security footage and can testify to what I heard 2 months ago. You deserve justice. Dr. William Harrison. I read that paper 3 times before I could fully process what was written there. $500,000. A life insurance policy from Richard that I hadn't even known existed. Michael and Jennifer waiting for me to die so they could collect the money. All their behavior over the past few years, all the isolation, all the cruelty wasn't just because they were tired of me or because I was a nuisance. It was because I was worth more to them dead than alive. It was a deliberate, calculated plan to kill me without dirtying their own hands. The revelation sickened me. How could someone be so monstrous? How could my own son participate in something like this? I looked at Dr. Harrison, eyes wide with shock and horror. He nodded gravely. "I know it's a lot to process, especially now when you're recovering from heart surgery. But you needed to know the truth. When I heard what they said yesterday in the emergency room, I knew I had to act. Not just as your doctor, but as a human being." I spent the 3 days in the ICU in a state of emotional numbness. The medical team cared for my body, but my mind was in a dark and confused place. I tried to process all the information, trying to reconcile the image of the son I thought I knew with the monster he'd apparently become. Jennifer had always been cold and calculating. I already knew that, but Michael, my Michael, the little boy who used to curl up in my lap when he had nightmares, who brought me flowers from the school garden, who said that when he grew up he would buy me a big house where I would be queen. How had that boy become a man capable of plotting his own mother's death for money? The emotional pain was almost worse than the physical pain I still felt in my chest even after the surgery. On my 3rd day in the ICU, I received an unexpected visitor. An elegant woman in her 40s, dressed in a dark suit, introduced herself as Rebecca Thompson, an attorney specializing in family law and financial crimes. "Dr. Harrison contacted me," she explained. "He told me about your situation and asked me to come talk to you if you're interested in taking legal action against your son and daughter-in-law. I won't charge you anything for my services. Cases like yours touch me deeply because I went through something similar with my own mother a few years ago. We were able to turn things around in time, but I know not everyone is so lucky. I want to help you." I stared at her, unsure of what to say. Part of me wanted justice, wanted Michael and Jennifer to pay for what they did. But another part of me, the part that was still a mother, that still loved her son despite everything, hesitated to take steps that could completely destroy what was left of our relationship. Rebecca must have sensed my hesitation. She pulled up a chair and sat beside my bed. "Margaret," she said gently, "I understand this is extremely difficult. He's your son, and a mother's love doesn't fade, even when we're deeply hurt. But you need to understand something important. These people tried to kill you. Not directly, but through intentional neglect and systematic emotional abuse. If Dr. Harrison hadn't intervened, you'd be dead now. And they'd be celebrating and planning how to spend the insurance money. Do you really want to let this go unpunished? She was right. I knew she was. But accepting that meant accepting that I'd lost my son forever, and that was a pain I didn't know I could bear. I'll think about it, I said finally. I need time to process all of this. Rebecca nodded understandingly. I understand, but don't take too long. The more time passes, the harder it becomes to prove things and take the necessary legal action. In the meantime, I'll start investigating on my own. If you decide you want to move forward, we'll be ready. She left me her card and left. I was moved to a regular room on the fourth day. A small but comfortable room with a window overlooking the hospital garden. Nurse Susan still came to see me every day, even though she was no longer officially my guardian now that I was out of the ICU. She brought me magazines, chatted with me about small talk, tried to cheer me up. One day she brought me news about Michael and Jennifer. They tried to come visit you yesterday, she said, but Dr. Harrison left strict instructions at the front desk not to allow them upstairs. He said it would be detrimental to their recovery. I felt a mixture of relief and sadness. Relief because I wasn't ready to face them, sadness because it had reached the point where my own son needed to be barred from visiting me in the hospital. Did they say anything? I asked. Susan hesitated. Jennifer was furious, threatening to sue the hospital. Michael just stood there saying nothing. Eventually, security escorted them out. Of course they were furious, I thought bitterly. I was still alive, getting in the way of their plans. I spent 2 weeks in the hospital. During that time, Dr. Harrison not only cared for my physical health, but also became a confidant of sorts. He came to talk to me every day, not only about my heart recovery, but also about my family situation. One day he told me his own story. My sister went through something similar, he said. Her husband and oldest daughter isolated her, socially controlled her finances, and created such a toxic environment that she developed severe depression and attempted suicide. Fortunately, she survived and managed to escape that situation. But it made me realize how common elder abuse is and how often it goes unnoticed because it runs in families. When I saw what his daughter-in-law said in the emergency room, when I heard his son silently agree, I knew I had to intervene. I couldn't just stand by and watch. I was deeply touched by his care. For the first time in years, I felt someone truly cared about my well-being. It was during my second week in the hospital that I made the decision. I was looking out my room window, watching people walking through the hospital garden, some visiting loved ones, others just enjoying the sunshine. I saw one scene in particular that struck me: an elderly woman in a wheelchair being pushed by a younger woman, probably her daughter, both laughing about something. The tender way the daughter adjusted the shawl on her mother's shoulders, the way she leaned in to listen to what she was saying, made me realize how normal this should have been, but how it had become an unattainable fantasy in my life. At that moment, I understood that I deserved better. I deserved justice. I deserved to live the rest of my life with dignity and peace, not in the shadow of fear and cruelty from people who should have loved me. I called Rebecca Thompson and told her I was ready to move forward with legal action. Rebecca arrived at the hospital the next day with a folder full of documents. She had been extremely efficient. In just 2 weeks, she had discovered not only the $500,000 life insurance policy Richard had left in my name, but also other irregularities. Michael had accessed my bank account 6 months ago, posing as my legal representative, even though he didn't have power of attorney, and had transferred $23,000 into his account. Jennifer had used my name to open a credit card a year ago and had accumulated $15,000 in debt I hadn't even known existed. They had both been planning to take complete control of my finances once I died, or if I became incapacitated enough to be declared mentally incompetent. Rebecca had obtained copies of the emergency room security recordings showing the entire incident. She also had Dr. Harrison's testimony about the conversation he had overheard 2 months earlier. She had even secured interviews with some of the nurses and other hospital staff who had witnessed Jennifer's behavior that day. The case against them was solid. We have enough evidence to prosecute you for attempted willful negligence, homicide, financial fraud, robbery, elder abuse, and several other crimes, Rebecca explained. Jennifer could face up to 20 years in prison if we're aggressive. Michael, as an accomplice, could face up to 15. Furthermore, we can file a civil lawsuit to recover all the money they stole from you, plus punitive damages. You could easily win over $1 million in damages. My head spun with all that information. $1 million, 20 years in prison. It seemed too surreal to be true. But the evidence was all there, black and white, impossible to deny. Rebecca continued. Furthermore, you have legal grounds to obtain a restraining order against both of us, preventing any contact. And of course, you must remove Michael as a beneficiary from any inheritance or legal document that may have included him. We need to protect you and your assets. I agreed to everything. I signed the necessary documents to begin the legal process. Rebecca walked away with everything she needed to legally destroy Michael and Jennifer. I was discharged from the hospital 3 days later. Rebecca had arranged for me to stay temporarily in a hotel near the hospital, paid for by the Abuse Assistance Fund she managed. It wasn't safe for me to return home because Michael had a key and could show up at any moment. The hotel was simple but comfortable, and for the first time in years I felt safe. I knew Michael and Jennifer didn't know where. Alice couldn't reach me, couldn't hurt me anymore. Dr. Harrison visited me at the hotel once to check on my recovery. He brought the medication I needed for my heart and spent 2 hours explaining the care I needed from then on. "You're being so kind to me," I said at one point. "You're doing so much more than any doctor normally would." "Why?" He smiled sadly. "Because no one should have to go through what you went through. Because I wouldn't be able to sleep at night, knowing I could have helped more but didn't. And because despite everything that happened, you're still here. Still fighting, and that deserves support." The legal process was served on Michael and Jennifer a week after my discharge. Rebecca called me to tell me how it went. Jennifer apparently had a fit when the bailiff handed over the documents. She screamed that it was absurd, that I was crazy, that she was going to sue everyone involved. Michael turned pale as a ghost and couldn't speak. Their lawyer tried to argue that there was no evidence, but when Rebecca showed him the hospital security footage, the bank records of the fraudulent transactions, and the list of witnesses willing to testify, he fell silent. The case was scheduled to go to trial in 3 months. Meanwhile, the restraining order was in effect. If Michael or Jennifer tried to contact me in any way, they would be arrested immediately. I spent that time in the hotel slowly recovering physically and emotionally. Nurse Susan came to visit me regularly, bringing home-cooked meals and company. Rebecca kept me updated on the progress of my case. Dr. Harrison called weekly to check on my health. For the first time in years, I felt like I had people around me who genuinely cared about me, not because of what I could give them, but simply because I was a human being, deserving of care and respect. It was during this time that I began therapy. Rebecca connected me with a psychologist who specialized in family trauma and elder abuse. The sessions were painful, addressing deep wounds I had spent years trying to ignore. But they were also liberating. For the first time, I was speaking openly about everything I had been through, validating my pain and understanding that none of it was my fault. The psychologists helped me understand that I had been a victim of systematic emotional abuse for years, and that and Jennifer's behavior had been deliberately designed to break me. It was a long and difficult process to accept this, but necessary for my healing. The trial was scheduled for a Monday in June. Rebecca had prepared me extensively for what to expect. It would be 3 days of hearings with multiple witnesses on both sides. Michael and Jennifer had hired an expensive lawyer who was trying to argue that it was all a huge misunderstanding, that they always had my best interests at heart, that the incident at the hospital was a moment of stress and nothing more. But Rebecca was confident. The evidence was overwhelming and irrefutable. The day arrived. I walked into that courtroom with my legs shaking but my head held high. I wasn't going to let them intimidate me anymore. Susan and Dr. Harrison were there to support me, sitting right behind me. Across the room, I saw Michael and Jennifer for the first time since that horrific day in the emergency room. Jennifer gave me a look of pure hatred. Michael couldn't look me in the eye. He kept his head down throughout the hearing. The 3-day trial was intense. Witness after witness took the stand. Nurse Susan described in detail what she had witnessed in the emergency room, how Jennifer had screamed that I wasn't worth the investment, how she had tried to prevent my treatment. Dr. Harrison presented the hospital security recordings which made Jennifer's abusive behavior and Michael's silent connivance crystal clear. When the recording was played in the courtroom, hearing those words again, "Don't treat her, she's just a worn-out old woman," tears streamed down my face. Several people in the jury also seemed visibly emotional. The defense attorney tried to argue that Jennifer was simply concerned about the Axe family's finances, that she had no intention of hurting me. But when Rebecca presented the evidence of the financial fraud, the illegal transfers of money from my account, and the credit card opened in my name, it became clear that there was a systematic pattern of abuse and exploitation. Their attorney had no arguments to counter that. When it was my turn to testify, I took the stand with my heart racing. Rebecca asked me questions about my relationship with Michael over the years, about how Jennifer had progressively isolated me from my family, about the years of emotional abuse that culminated in that moment in the emergency room where they literally tried to let me die. I spoke about how I had spent years blaming myself, believing I was the one failing as a mother and grandmother, when in fact I was the victim of a scheme calculated to destroy me and eventually kill me to access the insurance money. My voice broke several times during the testimony, but I managed to finish. When Michael's attorney tried to cross-examine me, trying to make me appear confused or unstable, Rebecca objected to every inappropriate question. The judge upheld every objection. Their attorney clearly had nothing substantial to work with. On the third day, after all the witnesses had been heard and all the arguments presented, the jury retired to deliberate. Rebecca told me it could take hours or even days for them to reach a verdict. But surprisingly, they returned in less than 3 hours. "That's usually a good sign," Rebecca whispered. "It means the case was clear to them." The judge asked everyone to stand. The jury foreman, a serious-looking, middle-aged man, read the verdict. In the case of the State v. Jennifer Patterson and Michael Patterson, the jury finds both defendants guilty of attempted, willful, negligent homicide, financial fraud, robbery, elder abuse, and multiple other charges. I felt my legs weaken. Rebecca grabbed my arm, supporting me. I looked across the room and saw Jennifer breaking down in hysterical sobs. Michael was pale as a sheet, looking shocked. The judge banged the gavel. "Jennifer Patterson, you are sentenced to 18 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole for the first 10 years. Michael Patterson, you are sentenced to 12 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole for the first 6 years. In addition, you are both ordered to pay full restitution to the victim in the amount of $300,000, plus punitive damages of $700,000. All assets and accounts of the defendants will be frozen and liquidated to pay this sentence." It was surreal to hear that. My son, my only child, was being sentenced to 12 years in prison. Part of me shattered in that moment. The part that was still a mother, that still loved the boy he once was. But another part of me, the part that had learned that self-love and self-preservation mattered too, felt a profound relief. Justice had been served. They wouldn't hurt me anymore. And maybe, just maybe, those years in prison would give Michael time to reflect on his choices and the monster he had become. Jennifer was led away in handcuffs, screaming and crying. Michael was led away in silence, finally looking at me one last time before leaving the room. There was something in his eyes, maybe regret, maybe just fear of what was to come. I'll never know for sure. The following months were a process of rebuilding. With the money from restitution and punitive damages, I finally achieved financial security. I paid off all the debts Jennifer had accumulated in my name, recovered the money Michael had stolen from my account, and still had enough left over to live comfortably for the rest of my life. I moved into a small but cozy apartment far from the house where Richard and I had raised Michael, far from the painful memories. I decorated the place my way with cheerful colors and plants in the windows. For the first time in years, my home was a refuge, not a prison, of loneliness. I continued regular therapy, working through the layers of trauma and learning to rebuild my self-esteem and sense of self-worth. Susan became a close friend. We had lunch together every week, went to the movies, and took walks in the park. She introduced me to the hospital's volunteer group, and I began volunteering as well, visiting elderly patients who had no family. It was painful at times seeing my own suffering reflected in these lonely people, but it was also rewarding to be able to offer the comfort and companionship I had so desperately needed. Dr. Harrison continued to monitor my heart health closely. My heart, both physical and emotional, was healing slowly but surely. 6 months after the trial, I received a letter from prison. It was from Michael. I hesitated for a whole week before opening it. When I finally did, I found pages and pages of apologies, of regret, of explanations about how he had allowed himself to be manipulated by Jennifer, about how he knew there was no justification for what he had done, but hoped that one day I could forgive him. I read that letter with mixed feelings. Part of me wanted to believe in that regret, wanted to think that my son still existed somewhere beneath the layers of cruelty and greed. But another part of me remembered how he had stood silently while Jennifer tried to let me die, how he had stolen my money, how he had actively participated in a plan to kill me. Forgiveness is not something that comes lightly or quickly in situations like these. I took the letter to my therapist and we worked on it together for several sessions. Eventually, I wrote a response. I told Michael that I acknowledged his regret, but that forgiveness was a long process that might never be fully completed. He said he had made choices that irreversibly destroyed our relationship and that no matter what the future held, our mother-son relationship as it used to be would never exist again. It was painful to write that, but it was also liberating. It was me finally setting boundaries, finally prioritizing my own well-being over the desire to maintain a toxic family relationship. Today, almost 2 years after that horrific day in the emergency room, I'm in a completely different place. My heart health is stable, controlled with medication and regular checkups. I have a network of friends who genuinely support me. I volunteer at the hospital 3 times a week and have found purpose in helping others going through similar situations. I've even started giving talks on elder abuse and older adults. Writes sharing my story to raise awareness of the signs of family abuse and the importance of seeking help. I have no contact with Emily and Noah, my grandchildren. Before being arrested, Jennifer had time to completely poison their relationship with me, telling who knows what kind of lies. It still hurts deeply thinking that they're growing up believing horrible things about me. But I've learned that I can't control everything and that perhaps one day, when they're older and able to think for themselves, they'll seek the truth. If that happens, I'll be here. If not, I've learned to accept that loss too. I've heard that Jennifer is being a nightmare in prison, constantly complaining, causing trouble, insisting she was wronged. Michael seems to be quieter, participating in rehabilitation programs, trying to be a model prisoner. Part of me hopes he genuinely changes, that he uses this time to become a better person. Not for me, but for himself. Because carrying that kind of evil inside must be a heavy burden, even if he doesn't realize it yet. Sometimes I still have nightmares about that day in the hospital, waking up scared to hear Jennifer's voice screaming that I was just a worn-out, broken-down old woman. But then I look around my apartment, feel the sun streaming through the window here, the birds singing outside, and remember that I survived. I didn't just physically survive the heart attack, but I survived those years of abuse emotionally. And not just survived, but I'm thriving. I'm rebuilding a life worth living, surrounded by people who value me for who I am, not for what I can give them. The biggest lesson I've learned from all of this is that it's never too late to stand up for yourself. No matter how old you are, no matter how dependent you feel on others, no matter how difficult the situation seems, you deserve to be treated with respect and dignity. You deserve to be surrounded by people who truly love you, not just tolerate you as long as you're useful to them. Family abuse, especially against older adults, is terribly common but rarely discussed. We often spend years justifying abusive behavior because we don't want to believe that our own children, our own families would be capable of purposefully hurting us. But it's important to recognize the signs. Progressive social isolation, excessive financial control, constant. Devaluation, neglect of medical needs, emotional. Manipulation by grandchildren or other family members. If you recognize these signs in your own life or in the life of someone you love, please seek help. There are resources available. There are people willing to help. There is a way out even when there seems to be none. I want to especially thank Dr. Harrison, who not only saved my life physically, but also had the courage to intervene in a situation that went beyond the call of duty. I want to thank Nurse Susan, whose kindness and friendship showed me that there was still light in the world, even in my darkest moments. I want to thank Rebecca, who fought for my justice without expecting anything in return. And I want to thank myself for finding the courage to keep going when it would have been easier to give up. Looking back at that woman who lay on that emergency gurney, listening to her daughter-in-law tell her she wasn't worth the medical investment, I see how far I've come. That woman was broken, defeated, ready to give up. The woman I am today is stronger, wiser, and more determined to live her life to the fullest for as long as she has left. 70 isn't the end of life, it's just a new chapter. And I'm determined to make this chapter the best yet. If you've made it this far with me on this journey, thank you so much for listening. Stories like mine need to be told so that others know they're not alone, that there's a way out, that justice is possible even when all seems lost. If you identified with my story in any way, leave a comment sharing your experience. Sometimes just knowing we're not alone makes all the difference. Subscribe to the channel for more real stories like this, stories of overcoming, of justice, of new beginnings. And always remember, you deserve to be treated with dignity and respect, regardless of your age. It's never too late to stand up for yourself and rebuild your life. Thank you for following me this far, and may each of us find the strength to face our own challenges and emerge stronger on the other side.